There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. You had to live in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and except in darkness, every moment scrutinized. George Orwell, 1984. Imagine a tower, perhaps 10 stories high, with an observation deck spanning a 360-degree view. Down the length of the tower are placed a set of extremely bright lights facing in all directions. Around the tower, arranged in a close circle facing the tower, are a rotunda of rows upon rows of prison cells. Each cell is separated from the next by a deep recess in the wall such that no cell has a view into any other cell around it, and the brightness of the tower lights prevent the inhabitants of any one cell from seeing across the central courtyard into the cells on the other side. The lights are so bright, in fact, that even the tower is invisible. You don't know whether there is someone watching you from behind those bright lights. Sometimes, when you break the rules by getting out of bed during the night, for example, a voice rings out telling you to stop or be punished. But at other times, nothing happens. You never know what it will be. Now imagine being trapped in a cell like this one all day, every day, forever. This is the Panopticon, first envisioned as a disciplinary concept by the 18th century philosopher Jeremy Bentham. Bentham, known to history as the founder of utilitarianism, devised the Panopticon concept from the Greek for all-seeing as a natural extension of the belief that the power, in order to be most effective, should be visible and unverifiable. First sketched out in letters during a visit to his brother, a member of the court of Prince Potemkin in Khrushchev, then part of the Russian Empire, his initial drawings and thoughts were inspired by the atmosphere of innovation and experimentation in Imperial Russia in this period. Bentham, as a utilitarian, was interested in whatever means were needed to produce the most happiness and contentment for the most people. He was fascinated by the effects on the lives of Russian peasants of the process of industrialization and the formalization of work responsibilities to focus on industrial output rather than the traditional life ways of Russian peasants. Particularly, he was interested in how capitalism, then as now an incredibly influential ideological movement, was changing the life of Russian peasants as their lives became regimented between social and work responsibilities. Just as in England, industrialization was transforming traditional lives and communities. As people's economic function was increasingly to produce industrial output, the problem of how to induce workers to be most productive was a growing area of interest. Today we'd call this the study of work-life balance, but in the 18th century, this largely concerned how to get people to work as much as humanly possible without them rebelling. Whereas traditional peasant societies were largely self-governing, able to handle matters of discipline within small communities, Bentham noted that industrialization, while it had enormous potential to increase productivity, could also be easily fouled by individual actions which would otherwise not be a detriment to the group. For example, in a peasant farming system, an alcoholic farmer does not have the ability to disrupt the work of others. But in a factory, a single drunken worker can cause a fire or otherwise disrupt the whole factory's functioning. Thus, new theories of organization and management had to be devised not only to control workers, but also to re-educate society to produce the most benefit through the growth of capitalism and industrialism. The Panopticon, first as a concept for prison discipline, but later applied to everything from hospitals to schools to science laboratories, was envisioned as a means by which people could optimally organize around a common goal without the need for direct control of every individual's actions. Now, despite our modern sensibilities, which with some justice tend to make us view the concept of the Panopticon as malevolent and totalitarian, Bentham in fact believed that the concept would produce a more fair and a more just society. Though fair and just for whom may always be appropriate questions when discussing the philosophical theories of privileged men in the era of ruthless colonialism. He reasoned, for example, that by constructing a prison in the form of a series of panoptica with a central panopticon able to look into each of the other subsequent panoptica, the problem of perfect prison discipline could be solved. He argued that because guards, just like the inmates, would never be able to know whether they were being observed at any given time, they would, just like the prisoners, tend to behave as if they were being watched. Then only occasional enforcement of the rules would be necessary to ensure that the guards followed those rules. The ancient problem of who watches the watchers would be solved. Since all of the watchers would themselves be watched, and the watchers of the watchers could be watched by representatives of the citizens, a prison without corruption might actually be possible. While there were many other practical barriers to creating Bentham's perfect prison, nevertheless, his concepts did find their way into modern institutions and, to some degree, formed the basis for the modern citizen's experience of the power of these institutions. Bentham's ideas were influential in the fields of penology and industrial organization. Numerous examples of panopticon prisons were built over the following 2 centuries. In Cuba in 1925, President Geraldo Machado commissioned a panopticon design for a state prison based on Bentham's concepts, along with other modern theories about rehabilitation, and the resulting prison, Presidio Modelo, and 4 subsequent prisons resulted from the designs he commissioned. In the Netherlands, 3 prisons were designed by Willem Metzelaar and constructed on the panopticon model, including Haarlem Penitentiary, which is now a national monument and used to house asylum seekers in the Netherlands. Jeremy Bentham's brother Samuel was a strong supporter of the concept. He aided in the design and construction of several panoptica built during his own life, including a round mill in Belper, a town in Derbyshire, England, where a single supervisor could oversee an entire shop floor. The mill operated for nearly a century. A brigadier general in the British Army, Samuel oversaw the construction of a panopticon arsenal in St. Petersburg in 1807, of which he wrote, quote, "It will be found applicable, I think, without exception to all establishments whatsoever in which within a space not too large to be covered or commanded by buildings, a number of persons are meant to be kept under inspections, no matter how different or even opposite the purpose." Later institutions such as debtors' prisons and children's workhouses would be constructed with panoptic designs, making it something of a symbol for the injustices of industrialization in Britain and around the world. Indeed, relics of Bentham's thinking were as clear as ever when Frank Lloyd Wright designed the Johnson Wax headquarters as a radical open office plan in 1936, replete with circular office floors and wide open spaces that placed each individual in direct sight of every other. The panoptic qualities of modern office plans are the natural organizational extensions of open plan workshops implemented for both safety and control of the workforce. What many planners today call worker-friendly workplaces are also, not coincidentally, management-friendly as well. By the mid-20th century, the panopticon concept had become something of a representative example of the failed idealism of the utilitarian school of philosophy. Thinkers such as Shirley Robin Letwin argued that Bentham's design was one of monstrous efficiency which left no room for humanity. She blamed the rise of surveillance states and totalitarian models of social organization such as Stalinism and Nazism on the work of utilitarians like Bentham. It was in the 20th century that philosophers would begin to view the panopticon as a malign object, one that represents not only absolute power, but also absolute discipline and control. A panoptic society is not only one in which every single person is under observation, but also one in which most of the discipline that is applied comes from the self. The simple existence of a greater authority who is capable of observing you is enough for you to behave as if that authority is always present. Another thinker with a very well-known fascination with the panopticon was none other than George Orwell, everyone's favorite example of whatever they're against politically. Orwell modeled the techno-authoritarian society of his 1984 novel on the extreme projection of the consequences of a panoptic society. The story also deals with the problems that later philosophers such as Michael Focault would explore in The Nature of a Panoptic Society. In a society that has the means to enforce not only behavioral standards, but also the standards of language and even of thought, the need to actually repress the individual becomes secondary to the individual's ability to repress themselves. Orwell's vision of 1984, including the concept of groupthink and goodthink, as well as newspeak language, which is used to describe a world where the party controls all thought and action, is explicit about there never needing to be a real big brother controlling everything. The power that the concept of big brother has over a person's mind is enough to control that person's actions. In the end, as Winston Smith discovers, everybody loves Big Brother. Michael Focault, in Discipline and Punish, argued that the disciplinary society had arisen out of industrialization in the 18th century, and that it functions to make human beings docile and useful in the industrial economy. Guy Debord, in Society of Spectacle, extended these observations also to the consumer economy, where shoppers are heavily pressured to buy as industrial workers are pressured to produce. Focault argued that the modern disciplines of education and clinical medicine are deeply embedded with the concept of the panopticon, that professional professional ethics and standards, along with proofs of compliance such as university degrees and diplomas, as well as scientific diagnoses such as mental illness or personality disorder, are all part of the mechanism of control necessary for an industrial or post-industrial society to function. In his view, a person's diagnosis as mentally ill serves to enforce compliance with society's expectations in the same way that the title of doctor enforces compliance with professional standards of behavior and of belief. He called these a form of political technology, in which groups such as the scientific community or the artistic community behave as panopticons, enforcing a standard of behavior on one another and defining the limits of acceptable behavior and belief for that group. Lawrence Wright, in his 2013 investigative history of Scientology, Going Clear, Scientology and the Prison of Belief, discusses how explicitly the Church of Scientology employs the concept of the panopticon to its organizational principles, from the use of interrogative interviews of its members as a form of therapy to its use of specialized jargon and labels used to identify ideas and thought patterns considered to be antithetical to the Church's teachings. Wright argues that the result of the Church's indoctrination is to cause the member to avoid any stimulus that might challenge the Church's own narratives, inculcating an instinctive knowledge of what is allowed and what is not. Cults and religions throughout history have used such tactics to maintain control of their members. Orwell's implicit depiction of the panopticon, along with Focault's more explicit work describing its function in society, has led to the idea getting widespread interest since the 1970s. Many theorists argue that the modern surveillance state is just an extension of utilitarian theory and the panopticon in practice. Critics of the spread of CCTV, particularly in Britain, have argued that CCTV represents an echo of Bentham's dystopian principle of enforced self-governance, with cameras functioning less as a means by which the government can catch criminals and more as an ever-present reminder of the government's unseen power. This power, through implication, serves to enforce codes of belief and conduct on individuals and to punish deviant behaviors with the potential for ridicule and discipline. Disney's recent Marvel series Loki, for example, is strongly inspired by the concept of the Panopticon. In it, the fictional organization, the Time Variance Authority, TVA, sees an army of bureaucratic office drones and jackboots enforcing the Great Timeline and removing anything from history that conflicts with the ultimate plan for all of time. Yet at the same time, the members of this workforce live and work in circumstances not unlike a panopticon themselves, not knowing who, if anyone, watches them, how many of them there are, or what their ultimate goals really consist of. Evidence of the panopticon is indeed everywhere we look, in fiction and in our everyday realities. Even comedy blooper shows can be seen as having a function for a panoptic society in which one's mistakes or deviant behaviors might make them subject to social ostracization or humiliation. Critics argue that programs such as these are the necessary output of a techno-panoptic society, as they represent the evidence that each of us is, in their turn, being watched and open to being judged at any time, anywhere, for anything. As Bob Dylan once said, sometimes even the President of the United States must stand naked. The Panopticon also continues to represent the extremes to which labor management will go in order to remain in control of their workforces, particularly in an age of decentralization and seemingly the splintering of once highly regimented workforces into hybrid or work-from-home arrangements. Meanwhile, governments are offering radically different approaches to the problem, with countries like those of the EU adopting powerful individual protections against spying and data mining, while others like China construct a truly panoptic society in which nothing is meant to be hidden. It's likely that the future of the Panopticon is tied with the future of the world economy. In this future, the usual terms of freedom and enslavement may come to mean very different things than they once did when the world was industrializing. Whether people are being encouraged to buy things to serve the global economy or are being forced to make things for the same purpose, the difference is not whether the Panopticon is present, but rather what its priorities for use are. It's not exactly our place to tell you whether today's highly connected society of social media and hybrid work-home lifestyles constitute any sort of panopticon, nor, indeed, is it for us to say that the very idea of a techno-panoptic society is inherently totalitarian or evil. Not all theorists agree on where society is headed in the 21st century. Are we headed for a time in which our visibility to the rest of the world makes us capable of finding and forming groups of mutual interest serving to free us from the social circumstances we might otherwise be trapped in? Or does the ever-present surveillance technology in our lives fundamentally alter how we think and experience ourselves. After all, the very society that some would depict as an oppressive system of control is also bringing you the evidence of those very arguments and offering you a chance to examine them yourself. Is modern life an episode of Black Mirror, or are our concepts of privacy and collective responsibility simply always changing and adapting to the technology and circumstance of the day? Systems of power, as Noam Chomsky has said, above all preserve themselves. But what they allow us as individuals to do varies as greatly as anything in life. Are you free because of technology, or are you a slave because of it? Would you be free without technology, or would you be enslaved without it? Even the terms in which such a debate can be had, be it in a casual conversation, a YouTube video, or in an academic journal, elements of the Panopticon are always present. The shared assumptions and beliefs that are necessary to allow two people to argue in a civilized manner are the very same systems of control which others may argue are controlling our actions and our thoughts. And yet, how can we have a debate without rules? Thus is the nature of the Panopticon in modern critical theory. It's neither good nor bad. So maybe it just is. Let us know what you think in the comments below, or don't. It's really up to you, isn't it?